Hi, everyone. My name is Lynne McIntee, and I'm a humble host of Youth Connections Café. I want to welcome you here today on this virtual platform. Before we get started, I will do a land acknowledgement from wherever we are today, tell you a little bit about the program and the amazing guest speaker that we have today as well. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. So welcome to all of you, welcome, and we're so happy that you're here today. We're here for Youth Connections Cafe, which is supported by Bell Let's Talk and Moksha Canada Foundation. Firstly, let me just do a little bit of shout out to Moksha Canada for allowing this platform and a safe space for us to be here. Tell you a little bit about Moksha before we get going. We bring awareness of public issues and concern, racism, discrimination, bullying, cyber safety. We organize community events and panel discussions such as these, where we get an opportunity to learn and grow. We are always open to ideas for programming, so please reach out to us on social media, give us a follow, give us a like, tag a friend, and pass it on. So we're here for you, we're here for community, and we're truly all about putting unity back in community and celebrating each other, as we all bring so much to the table and we can learn and grow together. Hence the conversation about Bell Let's Talk and everything we underscore with Bell Let's Talk. We'd like to do a shout out to Bell Let's Talk for allowing us to be here. And the program is focusing on mental health awareness and supports, resources for youth, especially newcomers as well. And York Region and GTA, although we have supported those across Canada and internationally as well too, we've been very fortunate to include that in our programming. So thank you to Bell Let's Talk for also allowing us to be here in this safe space to talk about mental health awareness, but underscoring in all the different subject matters we do with our guest speakers, because it's truly at the core of our being and everything we do in our lives. So thank you for that. My name is Lynne McIntee once again, and I'm going to get started. Actually, I will do a little bit of an introduction quickly. I'll say hi to Megan, who's here joining us. And Megan, hi there. Megan has been with us before as a guest, and so we thank you for being here today. And I'll say hi to Jack. Hi, Jack. And also to Nicole. And we will have some youth tuning in, but we will also upload this information to our YouTube channel as well. So at some point, we'll have some conversations with our youth about mental health and this topic matter that we're talking about today. Alrighty, so let me switch over to our guest. Oh, it's exciting, exciting indeed. So we have Elizabeth McCallion, who's from the University of Toronto. And just a quick wave for a moment. She is our guest expert, we'll say. She's here today talking about a variety of things, but we're talking about women in politics and leadership. And again, we underscore leadership in all that we do. Elizabeth is an assistant professor teaching stream in the Department of Political Science at the University of Toronto. Her research looks at gender and Canadian politics with a particular focus on Parliament. She is interested in how rules and norms enable and constrain the representation of women in our formal political institutions. Her work has appeared in the Canadian Journal of Political Science. So we want to do a shout out to Elizabeth for being here today. Welcome, Elizabeth McCallion.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
Pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. We're very humbled to be in this space with you and taking the time. So Elizabeth, we posed some questions to you, and we can deviate from those questions. We can branch off into other things. And I know that you'd be open to fielding questions from our participants as well.
Yeah.
So that's cool. So thank you very much for that. The first one is quite simply can you tell us about yourself and a little bit of an introduction?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a prof at U of T in the Department of Political Science, and I finished my PhD last year, and I was studying women's representation in the Canadian Senate. So made a bit of a name for myself as the Senate girl, and people ask me about the Senate because nobody else cares about the Senate. So I think that it's becoming a lot more important, and people are showing a lot more interest in it in recent years since some changes to the institution. So that's what a lot of my work focuses on. I was born in Toronto and I grew up here, and then kind of moved away for different university things. And now I'm back in Toronto, working at U of T. I like very close to my work, and it's really nice to be back downtown and back in the area where I used to hang out in my youth. And so yeah, it's that's kind of where I am in my life right now. I live in a box in the sky with my fiance and my cat. And yeah, and I day to day enjoy going to work and teaching students about Canadian politics and talking a lot about kind of identity questions and institutional questions in Canadian politics. So yeah.
That's amazing. So how cool is that to be downtown Toronto? And what an introduction there. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. That's very thorough. Appreciate that very much. So you're living in downtown Toronto, so you're really experiencing the culture of the city for sure.
Yeah.
So that probably helps a lot with the work that you do and the interactions that you have on your day to day.
Yeah, I think so. And I went to high school in downtown Toronto, so I'm familiar with kind of the student body at U of T. And so I can, I think there's certain like cultural things about Toronto that I think I understand as someone who grew up here. There's, slang, there's certain attitudes of like ribbing and stuff that I didn't realize, I missed. So it doesn't happen everywhere else. So definitely unique culture here.
Oh, that's very cool. That's awesome. Thank you for that. We were fortunate actually to have several conversations with former Lieutenant Governor David Onley, who also taught at the U of T, right? Fantastic fella who's recently passed away. And we were just so grateful for his support for Moksha Canada Foundation, but also another organization that we do as well. So we learned so much along the way. So amazing people come out of U of T, amazing people in the Department of Political Science as well. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Alrighty. The next question, when did you realize you wanted to pursue this field and areas of expertise?
I think while I was in my undergraduate degree at University of Western Ontario, I think someone mentioned Fanshawe earlier before we were recording. So yeah, I know the streets of London well too. So while I was doing my undergraduate degree there, I had plans to go to law school because my mother was a lawyer, and I thought, I should follow in her footsteps. How cool would that be? And a course counselor said that people who go to law school have to take a political science course, basically. Like everyone takes it. You should just take it if you want to do that. And then I kind of sat in that class. These amazing professors made it really accessible and interesting. And it was something that I didn't realize you could study at university. I thought, I just talked with my parents about politics around the dinner table or whatever. I don't. So my parents had really like inspired this interest in politics to me, but I didn't quite grasp that like political science was a thing until I got to university. And so then I decided, I wanted to switch my major and pursue political science. And I just kept having more and more questions that I needed answers to. And it goes beyond kind of like what's already been studied. So then, the next step is moving into graduate school and PhD and research and kind of digging around to try and find out the answers to those questions yourself. So that's how I ended up here now.
Wow. Do you mind if I ask, how long has that journey been up until this point? I know your journey will continue, but until this point in time.
So mine's been speedy because it was 11 years ago I started my undergraduate degree. But a lot of people who do PhDs leave and go work somewhere for a bit and kind of realize that they want to go back into academia or they have more questions to pursue or that kind of thing. While I was in my undergrad, I was reading some work from a professor who was at Queen's University and decided I really wanted to work with this person. And so I had kind of decided already in my undergraduate degree that I wanted to do a PhD and become a professor. So I went kind of straight all the way through. I did 4 years of undergrad. I did a 1-year master's degree. And for some people, it's 2 years if you do a different type of degree. And then it was like 5.5 years to do my PhD. And now here I am. I finished that last year. So.
Oh, congratulations. Amazing. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Virtual clap there. Thank you so much, Nicole, for that as well. So much passion, compassion, and energy that goes into that. And once you know what you want to do, it's amazing, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, I mean, at times you're like, why do I want to do this so badly? At times I'm like, oh my gosh, like if I didn't want to do this so badly, like there's so many aspects about academia that involve like rejection and criticism over and over because it's kind of the point of the thing. You're all trying to make each other better by pointing out what's wrong with your work or what you could do better and that kind of stuff. And I think there's different people have different approaches to the culture of that in terms of like constructive criticism and or just like yeah, I don't know, like
Yeah.
working together and helping and stuff. But so at times it can feel like, oh, this is a lot to put yourself into. But overall, I find it really rewarding, and it's something like that I really want to do. So.
You know, that's really cool, and because that you pursued that and you pushed forward, I guess, if you will, because you know we were talking about mental health and how important that is, and the work that you're doing, and that you had to push forward, dig deep, for some of those skills that you needed to pull out of the toolkit, right?
Yeah,
And I believe that we all have them. It's just a matter of finding them or pulling them out when you need and sharpening those tools at different times in our lives, right?
yeah, certainly.
That's amazing. I know we have other questions lined up. How would you feel about a question at this point for anybody who is interested? And if not, I'll go on to the next posed question, but if we'll be spontaneous for a moment. Yep, we have Nicole. Would you be okay with that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Nicole, go for it. And we're just preparing that right now. So it's awesome to speak with you. I just feel like we've known each other for years. It's really great.
Oh, lovely.
So Nicole,
Yeah.
you have something you have? Thank you.
Well, I have a question. I am interested in being a member of the Senate. What skills do you think would be useful for a member of the Senate?
Okay, yeah. So the number one thing is you have to turn 35 and you have to own $4,000 worth of property. This is the constitutional requirements to join the Senate. But I think the skills for senators is somewhat different from what it is for MPs and the politicians you often see on the news. The Senate doesn't get as much media attention unless they're kind of in hot water. So a lot of what the senators do is a lot more like working together and consensus building and willingness to kind of work with people who might have different views from you with the understanding that you're all working for the good of Canadians. Like nobody is trying to make Canada worse working in Parliament, but an ability to kind of work with other people and come to compromises and come to conclusions about things. The other piece is the ability to think critically about legislation, because part of the job of senators is to be looking at what laws what bills the government has put into place in the House of Commons and what they're bringing through Parliament. And the job of senators is to say, like, this policy goal may not be worthy, or your path to achieve your intended policy goal is not going to work. And so an ability to kind of think critically about those paths and to work with other people to try to correct the path and make legislation as good as possible are really like key important things to serve well in the Senate and the upper house.
So, okay, Nicole?
How much property do a Senate someone to get in that field of being a Senate?
Good question.
Yeah, so it's $4,000 worth of property, like land, that you have to own. The Supreme Court ruled that the government could abolish that $4,000 limit at any time because it was put into place in 1867, and $4,000 worth of property is not as much now as it was in 1867. So essentially just like own property, prove that you have some connection to the place that you're representing.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for your
clarifying.
question.
Amazing. Anyone else at this moment, or shall we move on to the next question? Okay, I'm going to keep going, but just piggybacking on what you said there, I'm just wondering about the soft skills. The critical thinking is very important, but could you speak to any soft skills that people could use in this type of work?
Yeah. So working as a senator or as any politician requires a good ability to work with other people, because a lot of your work relies on getting the agreement of other people to pass bills and legislation through the House of Commons or through the Senate. And part of it is to do with the fact that we have a system of majoritarian governance. So we need the majority of people to agree to passing laws that affect our country. Basically, you can't govern us without our consent. And so that ability to work with other people and to get that majority is a really key piece to being a politician. There's also aspects that people don't think about so much, such as management skills and being a leader in your workplace, because politicians have staff. So senators and MPs have like groups of people that they're in charge of, and they need to have good working relationships with them. And like, speaking of leadership, be good at kind of eliciting loyalty from their staff, and looking for like as much help as they can get from those people, and treating them with respect, and taking that approach to employing staff is an important piece of like the soft skills that they need to put into place. And another one would be resilience, and it's like such a special kind of resilience that, I mean, I think I'm pretty resilient, but the media attention that politicians get, senators, again, not so much, but when they do get it, it's often negative media attention. And especially women in politics tend to see a lot more negative media coverage about them, as well as media coverage about things more related to their appearance or their personal lives. So the ability to kind of weather that and to, I guess, look inward and to continue on in the face of such an onslaught of criticism all the time, I think is a really key soft skill. And that's one that when we have these discussions in my classes about would you run for parliament, most people say no. And the reason most of them give is that they don't want all that scrutiny on them and all that criticism from the media. So I think that's a really key piece of being a politician, is like the drive to do it and the ability to keep going despite facing criticism, and yeah, to see an end goal there, a purpose for why you're there. So yeah.
Beautiful. No, thank you. Anyone want to comment on the soft skills aspect, or no, we're okay at this moment? Okay. All right. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for opening that up. Appreciate it very much. Alrighty then. I guess you're kind of speaking about it already, but can you explain what leadership means to you?
Yeah. So I think, again, I think I've kind of given away the bag already, but my idea of leadership has a lot to do with respect for the people that you're leading, and leading by example. So, I mean, when I was a child, they always put on my report card that I had strong leadership skills. And then when I was a parent, when I was an adult, my parents told me that that was like code for likes to order other people around. So I think I a couple of years ago was watching videos of myself as a kid, like just like bossing people around, telling them what to do. And I was like, oh, it's not effective leadership. And thinking about how over my life, things have changed from being, an eldest child who's just telling my little sister what to do, into being, I was a swim teacher for a long time. So that involved leadership, but it's in a serious, potentially life or death situation. So a lot of leadership in swim teaching can be just like, no, like, stop, you can't do that. That's unsafe. And now the work that I do, one of my mentors like to say that there's no political science emergencies. So now my form of leadership is more offering guidance and allowing people to try things out, and to see what works for them, and trying to tailor people's education to their own needs, in ways that benefit them for their learning styles. So a lot of my philosophy on leadership now involves meeting people where they are and doing what they need in order to succeed. And in doing that, you kind of, it's not about just telling people what you want them to do and getting them to do what you want to do. It's about getting people to want to do what you want to do. I think a big part of that goes toward like gentle guidance and respect for the people that you're working with.
It's actually beautiful to watch that unfold, really, when you have someone in that leadership capacity who can have people working with them as opposed to against, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're all kind of swimming in the same direction, but keeping in mind all the different philosophies that come to the table, right? But
Mhm.
that human connection, I think, underscores everything that we do and any work that you do, really. But I think in the field that you're in as well, and politics and leadership, you know, leading by example, of course, but listening to other people and meeting them where they're at. Yeah, amazing. Jack, Megan, or Nicole, did you want to jump in with anything at this time? Um, yeah, go ahead there. And thank you, Elizabeth, for fielding this. Nicole can tell you a little bit about herself. She's been teaching as well. So,
Oh.
yes, yeah. Go ahead,
We can
Nicole.
talk later on, okay?
Yep, you got it.
Um, okay, so here's a question. Is there a textbook or book that you recommend for someone who is interested in learning more about Canadian politics?
Yeah, there are some great Canadian politics textbooks out there. One that I've been looking at recently is by Patrick Malcolmson et al. About the Canadian Parliament. It's one that I'm specifically interested in. But there are a lot of other textbooks written kind of broadly about Canadian politics, and they all have kind of benefits and drawbacks to some of them depending on framing of issues. But I think that a lot of textbooks about Canadian politics are written in really academic and dense language. And one thing that I like is more kind of basic political, like communication about political realities in Canada to people who are outside of an academic audience. And I found a lot of my friends, once they, reached their mid-20s, early 30s, and they started paying taxes, they were like, what's happening to my tax money? I want to understand what's going on in politics now, but they felt it was really hard to catch up. So I think that's kind of a gap there, that it's hard to get involved in politics and to understand what's going on when it feels like there's this whole story that you've missed. So looking at textbooks might be a good way to interpret some of it. But again, it's written for people, most of them are written for people who've already taken a first year political science course and have a basic understanding of types of institutions and political theories underpinning all of these things. And so I think, yeah, there's a lot to be done in terms of politics for dummies or something for Canadians to kind of to bring people up to speed just from like where do you start with this?
Yeah, for sure. And you're speaking about academia, and for the average person who doesn't necessarily have that background, and maybe they do have an interest in civic engagement, where do they go with that, and how can they align themselves with somebody, who can be a mentor to them in that regard, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of organizations who do this kind of public outreach stuff. The Samara Center for Democracy is a really good one, and they have a lot of resources on their website that will explain kind of these basic things about how Canadian democracy works. So that would be a place that I would definitely recommend looking into.
Neat. Okay, we're just waiting for Nicole to finish her thought there. Is that okay, Nicole?
Well,
Kirby?
I know it's not on topic, but I want to say, is there a museum or a historic place that someone would go and absorb that knowledge? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think because they feel often spread out in Canada. Like the museums tend to be more historical stuff. So, for example, the Royal Ontario Museum has a Canada exhibit, some of which is controversial for reasons I won't get into. But there's that option. And then there are a lot of like birthplaces of politicians or like a house where they lived where you can go and understand kind of their lives and what they did. But it is harder to see, the whole political story of Canada laid out in a museum because there's so many components to it and so much of it is current and doesn't feel to people like it should be in a museum yet.
Mm-hmm. And if I might just jump in for a moment, a lot of our youth that we serve are coming, their parents are coming from other areas, other countries, and, et cetera. So that knowledge, that new learning, I guess, if you will, under the Canadian landscape, It's a whole new thing for them and their families. So it's interesting to kind of take all that in. And as you said, it's really not complete, and it's a work in progress, and there are gaps. So we need movers and shakers out there who are making a difference, like yourself, Elizabeth, to
Well,
help us to fill in those gaps.
I find that in my classes, a lot of the people who are most interested in Canadian politics and Canadian institutions are people who weren't born here or their parents weren't born here. And a lot of people who were born in Canada or who come from long lines of Canadians feel Canadian politics is boring or whatever, because it's not as dramatic as stuff that happens in US politics a lot of the time. I personally don't find it boring. I chose a career in it. I find it very exciting. But a lot of people who are new to Canada are the ones who are most interested in kind of understanding how the system is and why it works the way it works. And I think that's really fantastic. It's like this commitment to like a political integration in the place where they're living. Even international students who are only here for 4 years understand that they want to know how it works in Canada and that what the government does is affecting them when they live here. So I think, yeah, there's definitely a role for new Canadians to play in understanding Canadian politics.
No, that's so cool. I've taught international students actually in the study of global, what it means to be a global citizen as well. And it's interesting just to hear the conversations in the classroom about global issues in particular, because everybody is coming to the table with varied perspectives, and it's so cool. And you feel so humbled to be a part of the conversation, learning and growing along the way in that regard. Cool. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So what makes a good leader? I think we're kind of covered that more or less, I think. Anything we wanted to add to that, Megan and or Jack, what makes a good leader in your mind? And it could be in women in politics, leadership in general. Is there something you wanted to insert in this conversation? What drives you as a leader, as well, right?
Yeah.
I know you're all leaders in your fields that you're working in, your committees that you're sitting on. So have a think about if there's something you wanted to insert in the conversation. Feel free to do that as well, Megan.
I guess to be a leader, you also want to be an advocacy person, like an advocator. So, for example, like me, I'm like a graduate of the DSW program, where it's a mental service worker. And to be a leader, I try to be like, hey, that's not okay. If they say like a person with a disability can't do it, I'm like, actually, they can, just they need extra help. So, being an advocator and finding resources, not only for them, but also showing them the resources for everyone else and educating them.
Yeah, that's a super important piece of it too. And taking responsibility for the people in your team, and as the leader, going and yeah, being that advocate for people. There've been times where I wasn't in a position of power to, speak up or to say like, please do this for me. And my leaders have done that to make things easier for me or whatever the situation may be. They've gone and advocated for me. And so, yeah, I try to bear that in mind for my students when I'm leading them. And that's a really important piece of your leadership. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because that is, yeah, such a key piece of being a leader, making sure that the team knows that you're on their side.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for that insert. Appreciate that. And let us know if you want to insert anything along the way, folks. We're open to conversation here. Then I guess what is meant by gender to you and the work that you do? Could you identify it for someone who's not really or just learning about it?
Yeah. So I feel like in the last few years, the discussions of gender have become ubiquitous in a lot of public spaces, and really discussions about like using the words gender and sex separately came about, I think, in the late 20th century. I was reading a book on gender and language recently, and it was very interesting, by Amanda Montal. I recommend it. And it was about kind of the idea of separating out the idea of gender and sex, is sex being this kind of what you're born as, and sex is normally assigned by a doctor looking at a baby's genitals and deciding this is male or female, and so they see sex as often binary, although it's not. There are plenty of intersex people, and that the doctor and often will just make a judgment call based on visual identification. Gender is more about performativity and how you express yourself in the world. So these come from the ideas of an author named Judith Butler, And she talks about, she's a political theorist, or she's a gender theorist, and she talks about kind of how gender is a performance, and doing things like putting on makeup or wearing long hair or wearing dresses is a performance that identifies somebody as a woman. And there's other things you can do to identify yourself as a man. And we're understanding a lot. In recent years, there's been a lot more discussion about the spectrum of gender. The spectrum has been more widely understood in non-Western cultures. And historically, a lot of Western cultures and Canadian culture and in European culture, they often see gender as you're a man or a woman. But there's been a lot more discussion recently that masculinity and femininity exist on this spectrum, and people can fall somewhere in the middle of that. And so they don't necessarily have to fall all the way at I'm all the way a woman or all the way a man, and people can kind of express their gender within that realm of in between. So the idea of gender, often we can think of it as like shaping our entire world because it's performative. It's something that we notice about other people, and it affects the way that we interact with other people. It affects, like when you see somebody wearing a dress and you see like their makeup on their body, like you understand kind of some cues about that person and who they might be, and people employ stereotypes to understand like things about other people that they see in the world. So in that way, gender kind of underpins a lot of the power structures in society, and that has a lot to do with what I study.
Amazing. Questions at this point? Yep. Go ahead, Nicole.
Sorry about that.
No, thanks, Elizabeth.
You're welcome. What can minority groups, like people who are labeled disabled, do to increase representation, that means our visibility in the government?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. So that gets at the heart of the kind of stuff that I study of representation. And we can think of representation in two key ways. So one way of thinking about it is numerical representation. So for example, how many people with disabilities are in Parliament? And another one we can think of is what's called substantive representation. So what's the substance of what people are doing there? Are people in Parliament making policy that is good for people with disabilities? Does it advocate for their interests? Do they act on behalf of those people? So you can have representation performed by people with disabilities to advocate for people with disabilities, but it's also possible for non-disabled people to advocate for people with disabilities as well. So that kind of splits the idea. And so part of it becomes, I think part of the question is about how do you increase representation in terms of the number of people with disabilities in Parliament? And I think there's a lot to be done, not necessarily on the side of the marginalized group who's seeking representation, right? There's a lot to be done by parties and by the people who run Parliament to make things more accessible. I remember a story an MP told me a little while ago about like many years ago. Another MP was elected and he was in a wheelchair and he came and there was no ramp to get into Parliament. And so things had to be changed to change the physical infrastructure of the building, first of all, to let people, differently abled people navigate the building in their own ways. And then there's things like the workload and the tools that are given to people to do the workload, and especially with things like campaigning and trying to get around to different, like to knock doors on houses and to create relationships with constituents and convince them to vote for you. There's a lot of resources that parties could be directing towards people with disabilities to do that. Now, on the other side of representation, I'm sorry, this is a long-winded answer.
This is great.
You should have asked me a question that was like just about exactly my research. So I study this kind of stuff, but like in the frame of like women, but also like women and intersectionality. So disability is certainly relevant. So on the other side of things, we have the substantive representation. So how do we get policies through that are beneficial for people with disabilities, or at least acknowledge and make accommodations for people with disabilities, if not beneficial, which would be the ideal version. So when we have to influence politics, there has to be a lot of lobbying going on so that what people with disabilities can do is get politically involved and support groups that are pushing politicians to consider different things in their policymaking, especially things like being witnesses in parliamentary committees, which sometimes doesn't directly affect the bill at hand, but it allows you to have a voice and speak directly to the government about laws that are coming into place. And to talk, in other ways directly with politicians in lobbying meetings or other forms of interaction, to try and ask those people who are already there to consider other views of legislation and consider implementing policy that would be beneficial, that acts on behalf of people with disabilities.
Okay, thank you. That's amazing. No, thank you so much for that. That's appreciated. Thank you for the question, Nicole. And I guess I'll move on to what is the difference between gender equity and gender equality? And I'll just tag in women's empowerment and leadership all in one kind of type of direction in the conversation. So difference between gender equity and gender equality.
Yeah, so equality implies that everyone's given the same resources to succeed, whereas equity implies that other people, like different people, need different resources in order to succeed. So gender equality would mean that we treat people of all genders the same, whereas gender equity would mean that we give different resources to different people in order to facilitate like an equality of outcome and to make sure that people end up having equal opportunities to thrive in whatever circumstances they're given. There's also the idea of just like creating accessibility for all. So an example might be like a gender neutral bathroom where there doesn't have to be, a special third bathroom, but to create accessibility for everybody, then there can just be, an entrance to one. So these concepts become tricky in Canadian political climate where some people are more ideologically inclined to say, like the idea is more like individualistic. People can, pull themselves up and help themselves. If everyone's given the same tools, it's about, natural talent and who can take who can take themselves the farthest based on the tools they've been given. And then other people are more inclined towards a more like community-based perspective and the idea that we're all responsible for each other and that some of us might have to go with less so that other people can have more in order to ensure more fairness. So it's just this like competing idea of fairness between equity and equality. And so when it comes to women's leadership, people apply those ideas in different ways. So it's like, does it have to be about giving women, for example, extra resources to run their campaign, or, for example, like childcare resources, because we know that women are often expected to be doing the childcare, and men are not as often expected to be doing childcare in heterosexual relationships. So there's like these kinds of tools that could be given to different people to ensure their success in different scenarios. It's all part of like, it's part of a debate. So I don't have a direct answer for how to improve women's leadership and women's political participation that way. But it comes down to kind of how you view the world. Do you view it as individuals should be able to kind of go forward with the same resources everyone else has? Or do you view it as some people need special assistance?
Thank you for those talking points. Really appreciate that. Megan has typed in her chat here, the washroom for all genders is a nice idea. Fanshawe has one in the new building that was just opened. So
that's great.
Yeah, making change there. Thank you for mentioning that, Megan. Appreciate that. Nicole is raising her hand, so go for it, Nicole. Thank you, Megan. And thank you, Elizabeth. Nicole?
Speaking of accessibility,
yeah.
Do you see Ontario moving towards a universal design for all, and people realizing accessibility is more than a right?
Sorry, I missed the end of the question.
So I heard accessibility is more than and I didn't hear the last word.
It's all right. I can read this again. Okay.
Sure.
Do you see Ontario moving towards a universal design for all, and people realizing accessibility is more than a ramp.
More than
Yeah.
a week. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I think that in some ways, if you look over the course of, a few decades, you have seen progress, and we have things like the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act that mandates, workplace accessibility for a variety of groups of all sorts of different abilities. So the question becomes, where are we going from here? I'm not sure. I don't want to leave on a negative note. I think in recent years, there's been a lot of like individualistic politics in Ontario and less concern for accessibility for all. I hope that overall the trend of politics of what I'm seeing, not just in Ontario, but in Canada and globally, is to improve accessibility and to acknowledge that different people need different resources in order to participate fully in society.
Hmm. And that's interesting you say that, because that's sort of where we left off our conversation with David Onley prior to. He would like to have seen more change by now, and he was one of the ones that helped to push forward the Accessibilities Act in the legislation, right? Legislature. So our last conversation with him was actually just that. I would, disappointed that there wasn't more happening in that area. So there's still lots of work, as you said, to be done, and he had said the same thing as well too.
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing. I think it's a learning and growing, and people to just get passionate about what they'd like to see, where they'd like to see change.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you. Keep on going here. Yep. Okay. Thank you, folks. Okay. Why is it important to take gender concerns into account in program design and implementation in politics?
Yeah, so this is a really important question for, again, like equity and equality. And I think I would even expand that question into saying not just gender, but many other identities. The concept of intersectionality, which is advanced by a scholar named Kimberly Crenshaw. If you're interested in her work, she's got some really fantastic stuff out there. So intersectionality says that people hold multiple identities, and that those identities can't be unraveled from each other. And that as a result of those identities, they face different oppressions. So the example that Crenshaw uses is in conversations about Black issues, often she was observing that Black women's issues were being ignored. And then she also saw on the flip side that in conversations about women's issues, she was seeing that Black women's issues were being ignored. So Crenshaw's observation about that was kind of applied to a lot of groups over the last few decades. And you can say the same kind of thing about about multiple identities. If you look at intersections of race and gender and ethnicity, religion, disability, sexuality, there are all of these different layers of identity that we have. So the importance of looking at how individuals hold their identity and how that identity interacts with the world around them to shape their experience comes into play when we're talking about creating policy that addresses needs for everybody. So we're in this political climate where we're often very concerned, so even if we talk about individual versus community, overall, broadly, the Canadian political system is focused on the individual, and we're in what's called a liberal paradigm, in the sense that small L liberals are concerned with individual rights. So this idea that individuals hold all of these identities and those rights need to be met by carefully crafting policy that gets at addressing inequalities that might be as a result of those identities, that's where that important piece of considering those identities comes into policymaking.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a little bit more time with you. Keep going with a few more questions. And
Sure.
okay, super. This is awesome. Learning and growing so much here. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And for our guest attendees as well. Great questions. Okay. Could you identify what gender mainstreaming is? We may have crossed over it a little bit, but if you don't mind, please and thank you.
Yeah, so gender mainstreaming goes along with this idea of analyzing policy in a format that considers how it affects different people. So when we're talking about why should we design policy with gender in mind, the process of designing policy with gender in mind is called gender mainstreaming. And in Canada, the Canadian government has called it gender-based analysis. So they will ask the department that's designed the policy for a gender-based analysis about the policy, and it's given in a memorandum to cabinet. So they can assess, has this been designed well in order to accommodate differences according to gender? In even more recent years, like the gender-based analysis thing lasted for a little while, and now it's gender-based analysis plus. And so the idea is to do a gender-based analysis, considering other identities that people hold. And so more of an intersectional analysis. Some work by one of my colleagues, Linda Mussel. She's at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, but she was in Canada for her PhD. She's found that a lot of I think she had a co-author on that paper too. I think it was Elena Hankivsky. They found that a lot of the gender-based analysis plus that the Canadian government is doing is treating gender as a primary identity and not acknowledging that, somebody's disability or somebody's race is as important to them and as central to their identity as their gender. So there's questions about the efficacy of gender-based analysis plus, but this push for gender mainstreaming is kind of this idea of trying to design policy for a fairer world, a more equitable world, and a more accessible world for people.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. Nicole, are you thinking of a question there? No? Yes, there's something. Yeah, we'll just pause for thought for a moment, and I'll just, let you assemble there.
This is my favorite question for you, okay? I have wanted to figure out why politicians say one thing and do another thing. So basically, they can say one thing, but they're actually mean something else. And I want to figure it out. How do I do that? And how can I solve this problem?
To figure out why they're saying one thing and doing another, and to stop them from doing it. That's a big question, to stop them from doing it, because it's key. It's central to kind of their ability to take power and to hold power, is to make promises to people. People who are constantly saying one thing and doing another, you would hope would be identified by the electorate as people who are untrustworthy and not worthy of being in office. And as a result, if you're constantly essentially lying, promising things and not following through, you're unlikely to keep winning government and to stay in power. So you have to at least follow through on some of the things you said you were going to do, or you'll get called out. But why they do it is, I think, often for the sense of optics, for the sense of getting support from people who believe their promises, and in order to get that power to then do whatever they actually want to do when they're in office. So it's about, making promises to do one thing and not another.
I believe we've all experienced that in our lives and all of the work that we do, for sure. So I'll keep on going here for a bit. You got a little bit more time here, Elizabeth, to finish. Yeah. Okay.
Of course.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay. Actually, just off the top of my head, how has it differed in the time that you've been studying in this field? If you don't mind, please, and thank you. Just have you seen progress, if you will, and some of these issues that we're talking about, and anything in particular that stands out to you where it's a notable advancement?
I think it's so hard, is often looking at politics through a gendered lens means looking at it with a critical lens. And so you get kind of, disillusioned with some things. I think in the time that I've been studying is not a very long time in all of politics. So I was still in my undergraduate degree when Justin Trudeau was elected. And I remember that being a big, thing that he had a gender equal cabinet and he was Canada's first feminist prime minister and all of that. The way that it's played out, I think, is it seemed like such a big shift toward feminism. The actual politics of things and the way that it's played out, a lot of people have argued that He has, what's called a neoliberal feminist agenda. So he's really pushing for concern for like individual and for economic concerns, more so than like community concerns or concerns just on the just for the common good outside of the economy. So there have been like critiques about that. So I think the public has become a lot more aware of these kinds of issues and is more interested in advancing women's interests and advancing interests of, for example, like disabled people and racialized groups and LGBT groups. And so people are becoming more critical of politicians in that regard. But we've also seen this huge backlash from the other side of people who don't want to feel that they are losing any power in giving up some of that power for other groups to be less oppressed. So you see a lot of really unfortunate, like racist and misogynist rhetoric out there, and groups organizing. So that in some ways it's become, I guess, just a lot more polarized in the time since I started studying this, 10 years ago. And so, it's changing. It's certainly concerning. And I think there's a lot to watch here about where these discussions go. I'm not sure I have a solution to any of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Then, Megan, no, keep going. No. Okay. So then maybe I'll just kind of jump into that other question that kind of crosses over. How could we, I guess, increase the number of female politicians? How can we reach out and encourage some of the new generation coming up, or just in general, other female politicians at different stages of their lives to get involved?
Yeah, so women's political participation is not the only condition that's necessary to have women represented, but it's certainly one of them that might be a piece of the puzzle in how we make sure that substantive representation piece gets full, so that their presence in the legislature becomes important for their ability to advocate for their own interests. And this can be women advocating for traditionalist women's interests, such as things concerned with the family, or with other like traditional women's concerns, or there's more kind of feminist or progressive women's interests, so things concerned more like workers' rights and those kinds of topics. So to get those women involved, there's this complex network. In Canada so far, there's been tons and tons of research on kind of like women's political involvement. Why are women running? Why won't women run? A lot of it has to do with political parties and their strategies for recruitment and what's called party gatekeeping. And there's actually been some work by a professor named Quinn Albaugh fairly recently about the idea of affirmative gatekeeping. So specifically looking for and recruiting women candidates to allow them to succeed within the party. But there's also questions of like, is it an attractive career for women to want to join? And when I teach women in politics classes and I ask, do you want a career in politics? They say no overwhelmingly. And as I mentioned, a lot of it is because of media attention and negative attention towards women in politics. And a lot of it has to do with the barriers to actually starting the job. So for example, societal expectations that women are available for daycare pickup and women are putting their kids to bed. And the reality that being an MP means that you're in Ottawa for half the week. Yeah. So how do you kind of strike a balance on those things? And so that takes out a large swath of the population who might otherwise be interested in doing this kind of job. There's also the aspect of like aggressiveness in politics, which is often tied to masculinity, and the idea that like being a leader in politics means being a strong man, and there's the like traditions of heckling in the House of Commons and a lot of like adversarial discussion between politicians. So that kind of environment not only takes out a lot of women who are socialized to be less aggressive and less competitive. So women aren't necessarily naturally less competitive, but socialized to be that way. But also there are a lot of men who might otherwise be very good politicians, really good at working across the aisle, strong critical thinking skills, but are not attracted to that kind of job because they don't want to be in that competitive environment. So that kind of like hyper aggressive environment in politics takes out many, many women who are socialized away from that kind of competition, as well as a number of men who are not keen to get involved in that kind of environment. So there's a huge network of factors that have to do with why women are underrepresented, and addressing each of those things can make a difference. But a lot of it has to do with culture change over time, and especially when it comes to things like media coverage. And a lot of it has to do with active work by the parties and the people in charge to make it a more desirable experience to want to get involved in politics and to be able to make a change.
Awesome. No, thank you. Nicole, thank you.
The last question is there one course that you recommend for a person who is interested in politics?
Good one.
Yeah. So do you mean a course at a university or a course elsewhere?
Wherever.
Okay. So I think at universities, there's the Introduction to Political Science course. If you're interested, most universities, their first year course will get you into that. Some universities have Introduction to Political Science for people who don't intend on majoring in political science. And that really helps you to understand politics as it operates in the world, and how you're it's not often as much about like the theory and the institutions, but about kind of power in everyday society, and how you can understand politics and behave as a citizen. So my world of knowledge is kind of limited to university courses because I'm a professor, but I'm certain that there are a lot of other, like I know that there are YouTube channels out there and stuff. I would be careful in what you look at on YouTube in terms of like descriptions of Canadian politics, because there's no requirement that anyone's an expert to explain it to you. But especially things like the Samara Center has a lot of resources. Samara Center for Democracy has a lot of explanations on these types of things. So you can kind of design your own course by looking around online and to see useful information. Again, I want to specify that as I'm looking up videos for my classes, because I'll play like a little video and lecture of here's a political clip of something that happened one time. Let's watch a news story from 1995 or whatever. And then I'm like, some of the stuff I see, I'm like, this is just so, like the titles of the videos, they're just so wrong. They're just not accurate at all about Canadian politics. So going to useful sources, like things that have credible reputations, such as CBC News or CPAC, which is the parliamentary channel, Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, National Post, all of those kind of sources that have this history, this reputation that they're staking their videos on or staking their articles on. Those are useful for like trying to get that ground level education of what's going on in Canadian politics.
Mm-hmm. And Megan, did you want to mention this, what you're saying in the chat here? And I'm sure Elizabeth would be very interested. Yeah.
Yeah, so right now I'm in a general ed course, which is basically all electives, because I'm not going into a course until September and I graduate from. It's an upper grad. But I'm in a psychology course called Community Psychology, and we learn all about like the stereotypes and like communities that go through a lot, and like we also learn about like politics and stuff. So I thought that would be cool to share, because like we learn all about the stereotypes and like all about like the good and bad things about everything.
Yeah, that's really important. And politics is everywhere, right? So as someone who studies politics, I see it everywhere. Some of my friends and family are like, relax, not everything's so political. But politics is political science is a study of power, right? And so certainly in courses about stereotypes and stuff, you can talk about, and about communities, you can talk about who has power and why they have power and how they exercise that power. So I think that's so awesome that you're learning about, you're explicitly connecting those ideas to politics within your course.
Nice. I know there's one final question, but we probably can open up the floor to questions. Jack, do you have any questions at all? One I was thinking of is how is the political citizenship different in Canada compared to other countries? And just thinking about the recently elected politician in New Zealand who's only 21 years old, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Canada for a long time has been seen as this kind of like world leader in gender politics and gender equality. I mean, we're one of the first, if not the first, to have like a self-proclaimed feminist government. The reality of the policies enacted might tell a different story. I think that despite Canada being a world leader in gender equality, that doesn't mean that we should be complacent and say, okay, we're done here. We're far down the list on percentage of women within our parliament. The Senate recently a couple of years ago, reached 50% women. And that's a result of the appointment process of the Senate. So the prime minister can choose who's going into the Senate and can make sure to make it 50% women. But the House of Commons has been stuck around 30% women for a long time and hasn't really seen much movement on that number in more than a decade. So the political citizenship of women in Canada looks really great by comparison, but that doesn't mean that there isn't more work to do in terms of women's equality in Canada and getting women involved in politics and advocating for women's interests, however they define them.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate that. Can we open up the floor for final questions before we head out? We're with Moksha Canada Foundation and Youth Connections Cafe. We have Elizabeth McCallion here from the University of Toronto. And Jack, is there a question you'd like to pose to Elizabeth before we sign off today?
When did you start this job?
Oh, so I took this job July of last year was when I started. And September is when I started teaching classes. So I'm fairly new at it. And it is a lot of work in the first year because you have to create all your new courses. I have to make so many slideshows a week to show everyone. But hopefully, as I settle into the job, that it kind of calms down a little bit. But I'm very fresh.
Good, Jack. Elizabeth, are you already mentoring people along the way?
I hope so. I think as a graduate student, I have, opportunities to talk with, when I was a graduate student, I had a lot of opportunities to work with other graduate students who were coming up kind of underneath me and to show them like how things are happening in graduate school and how these things work. And as I move into this stage of my career, I'm still considered quite junior. I know it's like I told you, I've done 11 years of this and whatever, but I'm still considered quite junior. So I'm like in the phase of being mentored a lot myself. And there's been a lot of really amazing people within the field of Canadian politics who've offered me leadership and advice and guidance, and even just like, a listening ear to talk about what's going on in my job and in my life and everything. So it's been really it's been wonderful to see those people as my mentors, and to take, like, I notice what they're doing, and it's like, I want to be that too. So as I move on in my career, then I'll get to a stage where, I can have relationships with graduate students who are much younger than me, rather than people who are, they're a couple years behind me. People, if they're like, someone asked me if I would do like mentorship stuff, and I was like, but I'm so junior. And they're like, but you know what's going on. So I think there's some level of like, understanding your own capabilities and requirements. But I think, it's just helpful to have people around me who are really excellent mentors and are like setting an example for how I want to be as a mentor, as I become one of the senior people in the field, when I'm where they are in 15 and 20 years, like that's how I want to be, gracious and involved and respectful and just doing like everything they can to help pull up the people underneath them and help us succeed.
Mm-hmm. Gracious, involved, and respectful underscores our mental health for sure. So thank you for highlighting that. I really appreciate it. I wonder if Nicole and Megan, we can wrap up with a final thought or question for Elizabeth. And then I might, if Elizabeth can think about it, just some words of wisdom for our youth moving forward. So go ahead, Nicole, and then Megan.
Do you have any suggestions for someone who wants to become political politically involved?
Yeah, so political involvement takes a lot of time and energy. And so I think that having the will to do that is really admirable. Getting involved in politics can look like a bunch of different things. So there are, for example, political parties are really like dominate the political scene in Canada. So getting involved with a political party whose ideology you ascribe to, those kinds of activities can be helpful for getting involved in formal politics. But there's also a lot of like grassroots politics and on the ground things that you can do. So involvement in advocacy groups and interest groups who are taking looking at a special like policy area or a special consideration and wanting to advocate for that. Getting involved in those kind of groups can be really helpful for kind of pushing for change from the outside of the formal political system and asking the people who are in power to make those changes. So there's kind of two tracks there, and I think they're both really admirable to spend your time doing that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Thank you. And Megan?
I don't think I have any questions. I think you answered them all, but I just wanted to say that you did a really good job.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm so glad for all of your questions and your thoughts that you shared.
Elizabeth, I think the words of wisdom were throughout your conversation, so no pressure there, but if there's any final thoughts, I just wanted to emphasize that Jack and Nicole and Megan are all on advocacy groups. They're heavily involved in the very thing that you're talking about. They're leaders in the community, and we're so happy that they could join today and be a part of this conversation. So Elizabeth, final thoughts?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, then I'm not sure I have words of wisdom for you because you're doing the things that I like think are so admirable. And I would, I guess, offer words of encouragement that I really appreciate that you're also politically involved. Megan's in 3 advocacy groups. It looks like that's so important. And to take it upon yourself to try to make this kind of change is really special, I think, and a really worthy goal. And I know that at times it feels that the system is stacked against these kinds of groups, and small victories can be even hard to win. But if you look at the progress over time, there have been huge changes in the way we treat different groups that have previously been marginalized or that might still remain marginalized. There has been change, and it's about like continuing to push forward. And so it's the work of people like you over the last few decades that have made the changes that we had so far. So I just really appreciate all of what you folks are doing, and that I hope that you keep that up and you stay involved in all of your advocacy groups, all 3, Megan, that you keep it going.
Amazing. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's just been a real treat to spend time with you. This is a conversation that we could carry on for sure. You're definitely a person where it feels like we've known you for years. So thank you so much for, as Megan had said, you did a wonderful job, and we're just so grateful. We can share this information with other youth that will tune in as well. We thank Bell Let's Talk, and we thank Moksha Canada Foundation for allowing us to invite you here today and on the safe platform to have a conversation about life and learning and growing. If you are interested in programming or want to reach out to us, please reach out to us on social media. We do encourage it. We'd love to hear from you. As you can hear, we have amazing guest attendees and guest speakers as well. Thank you to Elizabeth McCallion from the University of Toronto, Department of Political Science, for teaching us, and we're learning and growing along the way. Bye, everyone.
Bye.